Thomas Walker stared at the foreclosure notice with trembling hands. At 53, he never imagined losing the family bakery that had stood on Millfield's High Street for 3 generations. 6 months behind, he whispered to the empty shop. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating the worn countertops where his father had taught him to knead dough 40 years ago. After his wife Mary passed last winter, everything had fallen apart. The customers still came, but Thomas couldn't find joy in baking anymore. The bills piled up as he moved through his days in a fog of grief. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked Emma Patterson, the town librarian. Her kind eyes noticed the paper in his hands immediately. "Bad news, Thomas?" He nodded, unable to find words. Emma placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I remember how your cinnamon rolls got me through my divorce 5 years ago. This town needs your bakery, but more importantly, we need you." For the first time in months, Thomas felt something stir within him. Not happiness, but perhaps a tiny spark of purpose. "I don't know if I can save it," he admitted. "I'm too far behind." "You don't have to do it alone," Emma said softly. "That's what neighbors are for." Thomas looked around at the bakery that held his family's legacy, wondering if he had the strength to fight for it. He walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. People hurried past, some glancing in with concern. Everyone in Millfield knew about his troubles. In a small town like this, news traveled fast. "My grandfather opened this place in 1945, right after the war," Thomas said, his voice low. "He started with just one oven and hope." Emma stood beside him. "Tell me about him." "He was tough but fair, worked from 4 in the morning until 8. At night, 6 days a week, never complained." Thomas ran his hand along the old wooden counter. "My father was the same. They both believed good bread was about patience and respect for the ingredients." "Just like you," Emma said. Thomas shook his head. "I used to be. Now I'm just tired." Emma didn't argue. Instead, she picked up a rolling pin from the counter and turned it in her hands. "When I first moved to Millfield 10 years ago, I didn't know anyone. I would come here every morning and watch you work while I ate breakfast. It made me feel less alone." Thomas remembered her, younger then, always with a book, ordering the same thing, a cinnamon roll and black tea. "The whole town has stories." "Like that about this place, Thomas. Your bakery isn't just a shop. It's part of who we are." Thomas wanted to believe her, but the numbers on the foreclosure notice seemed more real than kind words. "The bank doesn't care about stories." "Maybe not," Emma agreed, "but people do." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old newspaper. "Look what I found in the library archives yesterday." It was a yellowed clipping from 1954. Thomas's grandfather stood proudly in front of the bakery with a young boy, Thomas's father, both covered in flour and smiling. The headline read, "Walker's Bakery feeds town during 3-day snowstorm." "Your grandfather gave away bread for free when delivery trucks couldn't reach Millfield," Emma said. People didn't forget that. Thomas took the paper carefully. He had heard the story many times growing up, but had never seen this photograph. His grandfather looked so strong, so certain. What would he do now? Thomas asked quietly. "I think he would fight," Emma said. "And I think he would accept help." The door jingled again. William Fisher, the old postman, walked in. He looked at Thomas with worried eyes. "Heard about the notice," William said. "Came to say my piece. When my Betty was sick last year, you brought bread to our door every morning for 6 weeks. Never asked for payment, never mentioned it again." He put £20 on the counter. "Don't have much, but I have this." Thomas tried to refuse, but William was already heading for the door. "I'll be back tomorrow. Save me a loaf of that sourdough, as he..." The door closed. Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I can't take his money like that." "It's not charity," Emma said firmly. "It's community." She moved behind the counter and tied on an apron that hung on a hook. "Now, I don't know much about baking, but I can clean, and while I clean you can tell me what your plan is." "I don't have a plan," Thomas admitted. "Then we'll make one," Emma said, filling a bucket with soapy water. "But first you need to make bread. Real bread, Thomas, the kind your grandfather would be proud of." Something shifted in Thomas's chest, a feeling he had almost forgotten. It was like the moment when dough finally comes together after seeming too dry and hopeless. He slowly put on his baker's apron. the fabric worn soft from years of use. His hands, marked with old burn scars and calluses, remembered their purpose as he reached for the flour. "One batch," he said quietly. "We'll start with one batch." As he mixed the simple ingredients, flour, water, salt, yeast, Thomas felt the familiar rhythm return. His body remembered what his heart had forgotten. With each turn of the dough, a little more of his grief lifted, making room for something new to rise in its place. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the bakery to find Emma waiting outside with Peter Hamilton, the retired accountant from down the street. "I hope you don't mind," Emma said. "Peter offered to look at your books." Thomas wanted to refuse, his pride still stung, but the foreclosure notice sitting on his counter left little room for objection. As Peter reviewed the finances, the reality became clear. Thomas needed to raise $15,000 in 3 months to keep the bakery. "It's impossible," Thomas sighed. "No," Peter replied firmly. "Difficult, yes. Impossible, no." That afternoon, Emma brought in her nephew Oliver, a young man with a marketing degree and too much energy. He spoke rapidly about social media presence and community engagement, terms that made Thomas's head spin. "People don't just want bread anymore," Oliver explained. "They want the story behind it. Your story, Thomas." Thomas shook his head. "My story isn't special." Emma disagreed. 3 generations of bakers, recipes passed down, the way you donated leftover bread to the shelter every evening. That's the heart of Millfield right there. For the first time, Thomas allowed himself to consider the possibility that his bakery might have a future. The weight on his shoulders didn't disappear, but it shifted slightly, becoming almost bearable. That night, he found his father's recipe book and ran his fingers over the faded handwriting. Tomorrow, he decided, he would bake again. Really bake, not just go through the motions. Before sunrise, Thomas stood in his kitchen. The old recipe book lay open to his father's special wheat loaf. He gathered the ingredients with care, feeling the rough texture of flour between his fingers. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Thomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The familiar smells of yeast and flour filled his lungs. For a moment, he could almost feel his father standing beside him. "Start with good ingredients," his father always said. "The rest will follow." Thomas mixed the dough slowly, his hands remembering the motions. As he kneaded, memories flooded back, his father teaching him to feel when the dough was ready, his grandfather checking loaves with a gentle tap on the bottom, Mary laughing. As flour dusted her cheeks, for the first time since her death, thinking of Mary didn't feel like a knife in his heart. Instead, he remembered her smile as she tasted his new recipes. "This is the one," she would say, eyes bright with pride. The bell rang, pulling Thomas from his thoughts. Emma walked in with Peter and Oliver. "Something smells wonderful," Emma said. Thomas nodded toward the ovens. "My father's recipe, it'll be ready soon." Peter spread papers across the counter. "We've been working on a plan," he said. "It won't be easy, but there's a path forward." Oliver laid out colorful pictures. "I've designed posters and a new sign. We need to remind people that Walker's Bakery isn't just any shop, it's Millfield history." Thomas looked at their eager faces. "Why are you all doing this?" Emma smiled. "Because that's what Millfield does, we help each other." Peter pointed to the numbers. "If we increase daily sales by 30% and hold 3 fundraising events, we can reach about half of what you need." "And the other half?" Thomas asked. Peter hesitated. "That's the harder part. We might need to find investors." Thomas frowned. "I don't want to sell pieces of my family's bakery." "Not selling," Oliver said quickly. "More like partners, people who believe in what you're doing." The oven timer rang. Thomas pulled out golden brown loaves, their crust crackling as they cooled. The rich aroma filled the small shop. "Try it," Thomas said, cutting thick slices once the bread had cooled enough. They ate in appreciative silence. The bread was perfect, crisp outside, soft inside, with a subtle nutty flavor that lingered. "This," Emma said finally, "is what will save your bakery. Not just plans and numbers, this bread, this skill." Oliver was already taking pictures with his phone. "People need to see this. Can I post it?" Thomas nodded. surprised by his own willingness. By noon, the shop had more customers than Thomas had seen in months. Word had spread somehow, perhaps through Oliver's social media, or perhaps the old-fashioned way, neighbor telling neighbor. Mrs. Brown, who ran the flower shop, bought 3 loaves. "Reminds me of how your bread used to taste," she said with a wink. Thomas felt a small flame of hope grow. After closing, he sat with Peter reviewing the day's sales. "Better," Peter said, "but not enough yet. What if we brought back the old recipes?" Thomas suggested. "The ones my grandfather made. Special breads for holidays, the twisted sweet loaf for Sundays." "That's exactly what we need," Peter agreed. "Tradition with a story behind it." Over the next week, Thomas dug deeper into his family recipes. Each morning he woke with purpose, his hands eager to shape dough. The fog of grief hadn't disappeared, but now rays of light broke through. Emma often arrived early to help. She learned to shape simple rolls, her face serious with concentration. Thomas found himself watching her, noticing the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. "You're getting better," he told her one morning. "I have a good teacher," she replied. Oliver's marketing efforts began to work. A local newspaper ran a story about the bakery's struggle. The headline read, "Can Millfield Save Its Historic Bakery?" People Thomas hadn't seen in years came to buy bread and share memories. Old Mr. Jenkins remembered how Thomas's grandfather gave him his first job. The Cooper family recalled ordering their wedding cake from Thomas's father 30 years ago. Each story strengthened Thomas's resolve. Each day the cash register held a little more. It wasn't enough. Not nearly, but it was something. At night, Thomas sat with his father's recipe book, planning the next day's baking. Sometimes he imagined Mary sitting across from him, offering suggestions as she used to. "I'm trying," he whispered to the empty chair. "I really am." And for the first time since her death, Thomas felt like maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The end. 2 weeks later, Walker Family Bakery Revival posters appeared throughout Millfield. Oliver had created a schedule of baking demonstrations, tastings and what he called Heritage Days, featuring Thomas's father's original recipes. Thomas stood in his kitchen at 4 a.m., preparing dough with care he hadn't shown in months. His hands remembered what his heart had forgotten, the pleasure of creation. The first event was packed with familiar faces and some new ones. Thomas demonstrated how to make his great-grandmother's braided bread while sharing stories of the bakery's early days. "This dough needs patience," he explained to the attentive crowd. "You can't rush good bread, just like you can't rush healing." The words had slipped out unintentionally, but they felt true. As people lined up to purchase loaves afterward, many shared their own memories of the bakery. "Your hot cross buns were at every Easter of my childhood," said Mrs. Bennet, who must have been close to 90. "My Jack proposed to me over your chocolate eclairs," added Jane Morgan with a wistful smile. With each story, Thomas felt more connected to the community he'd withdrawn from after Mary's death. The bakery's tip jar began filling with extra pounds, not enough to save the business, but a start. One evening, as Thomas was closing up, he found Robert Lewis, the town's wealthiest resident, waiting outside. "I heard you're in trouble," Robert said bluntly. "I'd like to invest in your bakery." Thomas felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by suspicion. Robert was known for buying struggling businesses and turning them into modern shops that lost all character. "I won't change what makes this place special," Thomas replied cautiously. Robert smiled slightly. "May I come in? It's rather cold out here." Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside. The bakery was warm from the day's baking, the air still sweet with the smell of bread and pastries. Robert looked around, his eyes lingering on the old photographs. On the wall, Thomas's grandfather in his baker's hat, his father proudly displaying prize-winning loaves, and Thomas and Mary on the day they took over the bakery. "I remember your father," Robert said quietly. "He was a good man, honest." Thomas nodded, waiting. He wiped flour from his hands onto his apron. "My father wasn't so honest," Robert continued, surprising Thomas. "He made his money quickly, not always fairly, but he loved your father's bread. Said it was the only honest thing he enjoyed." Thomas didn't know what to say. He had never heard this side of Robert before. "I'm not here to change your bakery," Robert said. I'm here because places like this are disappearing. The high street is becoming all the same shops, all looking alike, selling the same things. He touched the worn wooden counter. This has history. You can't buy that. Thomas studied Robert's face, looking for signs of dishonesty. He found none. Why? Would you help me? Thomas asked. Robert looked down. My wife died 3 years ago, cancer. In her last weeks, all she wanted was your lemon tarts. She said they reminded her of her childhood. His voice grew softer. You made them fresh every day, even though you must have known they were for someone dying. Thomas remembered. Mary had told him about Mrs. Lewis's illness. She had insisted they make the tarts perfect each day. It was Mary's idea, Thomas admitted. She always noticed what people needed. Robert nodded. Good people, both of you. This town needs more of that, not less. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is my offer. I'll clear your debt. All. Of it. In return, I want 2 things. Thomas tensed. First, I want your bread supplied to my new hotel on the edge of town. Exclusive contract for 3 years. That seemed fair. And second, teach my grandson to bake, Robert said, his voice suddenly emotional. He's 16, bright but troubled since his parents' divorce. He needs to learn something real, something he can do with his hands. Of all the things Thomas expected, this wasn't it. I'm not a teacher. You taught those people today, Robert pointed out. They were hanging on your every word. Thomas thought about it. The idea of passing on his family's knowledge appealed to him. Maybe it was time to think beyond just saving the bakery. Maybe it was time to ensure its future. I'll need to see the contract, Thomas said cautiously. And meet your grandson first. Robert smiled properly this time. His name is James. He's a good kid underneath it all, just needs direction. They shook hands, and for the first time in months Thomas felt the future opening up rather than closing down. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the bakery to find a small crowd waiting. Oliver had organized another demonstration, this time for local schoolchildren. Today we're making simple bread rolls, Thomas explained to the eager faces. Everyone gets to shape their own. The children's hands were clumsy but enthusiastic. Flour covered everything, the tables, the floor, their faces. Their laughter filled the bakery. Among them was a tall, quiet teenager who stood back from the others. He watched with careful eyes, not participating but not leaving either. Thomas approached him. You must be James. The boy nodded, slightly defensive. My grandfather said I should come. Do you want to be here? Thomas asked directly. James shrugged. Don't know anything about baking. Neither did I once, Thomas replied. Want to try? He led James to a quiet corner with a small piece of dough. Just feel it first, get to know it. Reluctantly, James touched the dough, then began to knead it, as Thomas demonstrated. My wife used to say you can tell a lot about a person by how they handle dough, Thomas said conversationally. Impatient people punch it too hard. Nervous people work it too little. James focused on the dough, his movements gradually becoming more confident. What does my dough say about me? Thomas watched the boy's hands. That you're more careful than you let on. That you pay attention. A small smile appeared on James's face, quickly hidden, but Thomas had seen it. By the end of the day, the bakery had made more money than any day since Thomas could remember. The revival was working. People were coming back not just for bread but for connection. To each other, to the past, to something real in a world that often felt too fast and too cold. That night, Thomas sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter to Mary, something he had done often since her death but had stopped in recent months. I think we might save it after all, he wrote. It won't be the same without you, nothing is, but it might be good again in a different way. He signed the letter and tucked it away with the others. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall on Millfield, covering the old town in white. Thomas watched it from his window, feeling for the first time in a long while a quiet peace. The end Thomas invited Robert in for tea, prepared to defend his bakery's soul. I don't want to buy you out, Robert clarified, surprising Thomas. Mary was kind to my mother in her final years. She'd bring fresh bread to the care home twice weekly, refusing payment. I'd like to return that kindness. Robert proposed a fair arrangement. He would help clear the debt, and in return the bakery would supply his new hotel with daily bread. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would buy Thomas precious time. Meanwhile, Oliver's marketing efforts were bearing fruit. A regional food magazine featured Thomas's story, bringing visitors from neighboring towns. Emma organized a Save Our Bakery fundraiser at the library, where Thomas taught children to make simple bread rolls. Among those children was Lily, a quiet 8-year-old who rarely spoke since losing her father. As Thomas helped her shape dough, with small determined hands she looked up at him. "My dad said baking helps sad hearts feel better," she whispered. "Does it help yours?" Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes," he admitted, "it does." That night, Thomas found himself baking, well past midnight, not for customers but for himself. He made all Mary's favorites, hazelnut scones, orange cardamom buns, and the dark chocolate bread they'd developed together. For the first time since her passing, memories brought comfort rather than pain. He could almost hear her laughter when the chocolate bread came out slightly lopsided as it always did. "Some recipes need 2 pairs of hands," he murmured to the empty kitchen, but somehow it didn't feel empty anymore. The scent of fresh baked goods filled the small apartment above, the bakery. Thomas sat at his kitchen table surrounded by Mary's favorite treats. Dawn was still hours away, but sleep felt far off. Instead, he found himself writing in an old notebook, jotting down memories of Mary that he feared forgetting, the way she hummed while washing dishes, how she always added extra cinnamon to everything in autumn, her habit of leaving notes in his lunch. The words flowed easily, unlike the stiff, formal eulogy he had struggled to write for her funeral. These were real memories, small but precious. Soft knock on his door startled him. Emma stood there, wrapped in a heavy coat. "I saw your light on," she explained. "I was worried." Thomas realized how strange it must look, all the baking at this hour. "I couldn't sleep, come in." Emma entered, bringing with her the cold, fresh smell of night air. Her eyes widened at the array of baked goods. "Mary's favorites," Thomas explained. "I needed to make them." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. She sat at the table, accepted a scone and bit into it. "This is wonderful," she said simply. "It was her recipe," Thomas said. "She had a way with flavors I never quite matched." "Tell me about her," Emma said. So Thomas did. He told Emma how Mary could charm even the grumpiest customers, how she remembered everyone's orders, how she kept the books with perfect precision. He spoke of their early marriage, living in the tiny apartment, saving to buy the bakery from his father. Emma listened, really listened, in a way few people had since Mary died. Most friends had grown uncomfortable with his grief, offering platitudes or changing the subject. "She sounds remarkable," Emma said when he finally fell silent. "She was," Thomas agreed. "But tonight I realized something. Mary wouldn't want me to lose the bakery. She put too much of herself into it." Emma smiled. "No, she wouldn't." They talked until the sky began to lighten. Thomas found himself laughing at stories he hadn't remembered in years, mistakes they'd made, disasters turned triumphs. The time Mary accidentally doubled the salt in a wedding cake and had to remake it overnight. As dawn broke, Thomas realized he felt lighter than he had in months. Grief still sat in his chest, but it had shifted from a crushing weight to something he could carry. "I should open the shop," he said, suddenly aware of the time. "I'll help," Emma offered. Later that morning, as Thomas kneaded dough for the day's bread, the bell above the door jingled. Lily and her mother entered the bakery. "Lily couldn't wait to come back," her mother explained. "She talked about nothing else all evening." Thomas smiled at the little girl. "Would you like to help me again?" Lily nodded, her eyes serious but eager. Thomas found a small apron, one that had belonged to his niece years ago, and helped Lily put it on. He showed her how to form simple rolls, his large hands guiding her tiny ones. "My dad made bread with me every Sunday," Lily said quietly as they worked. "Before he got sick." Thomas nodded, understanding the gift of this confidence. "He taught you well. Your hands know what to do." Lily worked with careful concentration, her tongue poking out slightly at the corner of her mouth. When she finished her first perfect roll, her smile lit up the room. "Can I make one for my mum too?" she asked. "As many as you want," Thomas told. Her Lily's mother watched with tear-filled eyes. "This is the first time she's shown interest in anything since her father died," she whispered to Thomas. Thank you. Thomas understood. Baking had saved him too, not once, but twice now. First when his father taught him as a boy, giving him purpose and pride, and now again pulling him back from the edge of despair. The day passed in a blur of customers and baking. The hotel order for Robert kept Thomas busy, but he found energy he hadn't felt in months. Emma helped at the counter, while Oliver continued his marketing magic online, posting pictures of Lily's bread rolls that quickly gathered hundreds of likes. That evening, as Thomas was cleaning up, the phone rang. It was Peter with news about the fundraiser. "We've raised nearly £5,000, Peter announced proudly. "Between that and Robert's help with the debt, we're getting there, Thomas." After hanging up, Thomas sat in the quiet bakery. The tools of his trade surrounded him, rolling pins worn smooth by decades of use, battered baking sheets that had produced thousands of loaves, his father's old recipe book. He opened the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Mary had written, "Notes in the margins, little improvements to his grandfather's recipes, reminders about temperature and timing." Her handwriting, so neat and familiar, made his heart ache, but not break. "I miss you," he said aloud. "I always will. But I think I'm finding my way back." The empty bakery held no answer, yet Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, but also more possibilities. The path ahead was becoming clearer. Not a return to what was before, but something new built on the foundation of all he had loved and lost. Through the window, he could see snow beginning to fall on Millfield's quiet streets. Thomas turned the lights down low and watched the white flakes dance in the glow of the street lamps, feeling for the first time in a long time that he was exactly where he needed to be. The end.